Let's talk about Dreamworks' 37th animated feature film, Abominable. But before we begin, I want to remind everyone to stay inside and to stay safe during the global pandemic of COVID-19. But with that said, let's begin. Abominable was directed by animation veteran Jill Colton, who has worked on Pixar films such as Toy Story 1 and 2, A Bug's Life, and Monsters, Inc. She also directed Sony Pictures Animation's Open Season. This film was a co-production between Dreamworks and Pearl Studios in China, which is something I'll get into further on in this video. Abominable was released on September 27, 2019, and was distributed by Universal Pictures. This film had a budget of $75 million and made a domestic box office of over $60 million, an international box office of almost $130 million, and a worldwide box office of almost $190 million. Overall, Abominable did well in its opening weekend box office, but when you compare it to other DreamWorks animation films, it did below the average. So I'll be looking at this film through the perspectives of animation, editing, cinematography, storytelling, and sound design. I'll be focusing on the Cliffside Buddah scene, even though it's strictly sound design. Dreamworks Animation Studios has been in the industry for the past 25 years, and it's been doing very well. I believe it's learning a lot from Pixar in creating its characters and establishing that sense of empathy between its characters and the audience. Empathy is a term I'll be using a lot in this video, and I'll be discussing it through the perspectives I mentioned earlier. So you might be asking what empathy is, and the Merriam-Webster dictionary gives a very complete but complex definition, which I'm just going to put up here for you to read. But basically, empathy is just putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. Let's talk about animation. The animation in this film is fantastic. Everything from the hair on the jetty to the special effects that occur on the Cliffside Buddah scene when Everest is humming to G's violin song. Now, the character design, in particular Everest. Everest's character design was meant to be unpredictable, making his hair look fluffy and tangible. This is an excellent way of establishing that empathy relationship between the character and the audience. How exactly did DreamWorks do this? How did they make Everest's hair look fluffy and tangible? Well, they did this effect through their in-house rendering program Moonray. And how else did they establish that empathy between Everest and the audience? According to Colton, the most important thing about Everest was to make him mute and only reveal his depths of understanding visually. So when we see an animated film with animals inside, we're expecting them to talk. In this film, Everest doesn't talk. He expresses himself visually. That is not easy to do in animation, but in live action, animals do it naturally. Everest did a really nice job of creating that sense of empathy through his visual communication with the characters. Let's move on to editing. How is empathy portrayed through editing? Editing is very crucial to a film, unlike cinematography. Now, the success of your film really depends on the editing. You will all argue that cinematography is more important, and I agree. Editing is a process in which you invest yourself into the story in order to deliver a meaningful connection and story to the audience. So how is this connection delivered through editing? Walter Murch, a prolific editor, established the rule of 6, which is more of a guideline to improving your editing than a hardcore rule. So the rule of 6 consists of emotion, story, rhythm, eye trace, 2D plane of screen, and 3D space. If you have emotion, story, and rhythm nailed into your edit, then you have a successful film. You have that connection with the audience. 3D space, 2D plane, and eye trace all come in when you're choosing your shots. It all comes in naturally. But emotion, story, and rhythm is what has to be nailed into that edit first. So how did Abominable establish that rule of 6 in its editing? Well, the story was established very early on in the movie. It was touching, and it's touching as a whole. But they established that connection at the very beginning of the story and emotion. Now rhythm came in next. The rhythm of the film is both fast-paced in the action sequences and medium-paced in the calmer scenes. And this is due to the correct placement of fade-to-black transitions. These fade-to-black transitions create moments of suspense and relief in the audience. Fade-to-black transitions in the action sequences create moments of suspense, while the fade-to-black transitions in the calmer scenes create moments of relief in the audience. These fade to black transitions allow the audience to be at the edge of their seats but at the same time allows them to breathe and take in the information they have been exposed to, and to also prepare for the next action sequence. Now, cinematography. Cinematography is all about camera movements, placements, blocking, and framing. Getting all those shots ready for the editor to put together and create this compelling story. And if you get all these right, you got a compelling story. You have a successful film. You have the audience engaged with your story. So cinematography in animation is not as easy as cinematography in live action. In animation, the computer is manipulating the camera for you. In live action, you yourself are manipulating the camera. Now, whether it's live action or animation, the rule of thirds is always applied. And what is the rule of thirds? Well, the rule of thirds is when you aesthetically balance or unbalance a shot in order to attract the viewer's attention to a particular place on the screen. The rule of thirds is used in film to dynamically move the story along and to stress a particular character's emotion that the filmmaker wants the audience to empathize with, or to also stress a particular situation the filmmaker wants the audience to remember for later. So here's the scene of the Cliffside Buddah and an example of the rule of thirds. Basically, this scene is about G opening herself up and not being scared of playing the violin for others. So when we break this shot into thirds, we see Everest is on screen left, and we have nothing on screen right. We have G on screen center. So this shot is unbalanced, but at the same time, it's effective. G here is trying to open up and to share her talents with the world, while Everest on screen left is encouraging her to be herself, not worrying about what others are thinking. This unbalanced shot is directing the audience to screen center and partially to screen left. Everest is just serving as a reinforcement and encouragement vehicle so that she doesn't recoil back to her old self of being reserved and unwilling to share her talents with others. So for a shot or scene to be effective, there has to be blocking, camera blocking, character blocking in order to get that message across. This scene uses mostly perpendicular and parallel camera blocking, and it is basically used to emphasize those emotions that the characters were exhibiting in each shot. Everest here serves as an encouragement vehicle for G as she is preparing to open herself up to the world and not be that old self that pushes people away. Now, Everest has both internal and external objectives as well. His internal objective is to get to the Himalayas and get back to his family, and his external objective is to open G's mind and eyes to show her that she is not the center of the world, and she is not the only one going through a loss. Her family, her mother, and her grandmother are also going through that same pain that she is going through, and she is not serving as that pillar of support that her mother and grandmother need. Yes, G is also going through a lot of pain, but when you go through pain collectively as a family, the pain eases off, and it feels better to go through that pain with somebody else, with your family members, than going through it alone and suffering alone. Everest is trying to make her realize that there are people who want to help her, who understand that she is going through that pain. Now for the coverage of this scene. This scene uses a lot of medium close-ups and long shots. But what's more interesting is that in between those cover shots, there's a moving master. And this moving master gives the audience a peripheral vision of what the setting is and of what she is experiencing in the scene. She is overcoming those hardships and achieving her internal objectives without realizing it. So these elements of blocking and the rule of thirds are effectively used in this film to show and emphasize that connection that the audience has with the characters, to show the characters' emotions, and to create that connection. So how does animation, cinematography, and editing all come together to create this beautiful film? It's the storytelling. The story arc in this film is based on Pixar's storytelling model, in which each character has its own developmental arc, and they're allowed to grow into their new selves. The storyline in this film is very touching, and gives the audience a powerful message of friendship and hardship. She learns the importance of being there for family, even in the hardest moments of life. On the other hand, Jin learns that there is more to life than social media and girls. He also learns that being self-centered only pushes the people you love away. Peng and Everest are just there to open the eyes of Jin and Ji, and to show them the value of friendship and family. The message here is mostly directed at us. We're mostly like Jin, thin, we're self-centered, maybe, and we're addicted to social media. We forget about the people who love us, those who are around us, those who are there for us when we most need it. We forget about nature, and we forget about the world around us in general. Since we are always on our phones and checking, did this person like our photo? Did that person comment? What did she think of us? Now we're also like G. We push people who love us away from us. We want to deal with our own pain. So we forget that those people who want to help us are most likely also dealing with that same pain and want to go through it together. Now let's talk about sound design. Sound design is composed of sound effects, dialogue, and music. These three add to the story enormously, and therefore, in today's moving pictures, it's essential. Here's where we get into more detail about this Cliffside Buddah scene. It's one of my favorite scenes, and it's one of the most beautiful scenes in this film. Here's why. The sound design in this scene is creatively embedded into the story, and it's where we go from diegetic to non-diegetic sound. And here we're also using two sources of music from two different composers. First one being from Rupert Williams. Let's just say it's more like a leitmotif for G. A leitmotif is a musical representation of a character in a story. And then we use Coldplay as a soundtrack. But it's a soundtrack that is not just placed there, but it's beautifully embedded into the story. Here's where you ask, what is diegetic sound and what is non-diegetic sound? Non-diegetic sound is noise that doesn't happen on screen, but is added in post-production. Now, diegetic sound is noise that happens on screen and was not added in post-production. To summarize, diegetic sound is character's world, non-diegetic sound is audience worlds. Okay, let's walk through this 3-minute scene, because the sound design in this scene is out of this world, in my opinion. During the first minute and 4 seconds of this scene, we hear Coldplay's Fixie track, which is basically setting up G's performance.
I wish Dad were here to see this.
Lights will guide you home and ignite your bones, and I will
Then we start getting an organ sound, which transitions into G's performance. I'm not the only one noticing this organ sound. According to a review of the same film by Amy Nicholson of Variety magazine, in the film's most moving scene, G plays a solo so powerful it summons rain, flowers, and the Coldplay hit Fixie. It's a fascinating musical mashup that starts with a Christian-style organ playing over the image of a famous Buddhist religious site that gives way to a pop mega hit. Basically, she is saying that this organ sound is at the beginning, but I notice it more at the end of the minute and 4 seconds, when the flowers bloom as G plays her violin song. This is such a beautiful scene. In it, we went from non-diegetic, which is the Coldplay track, to diegetic, which is G's performance. Minute 2:23 till the end of the scene, we go back to non-diegetics, which is the Coldplay track, and this goes on for a couple scenes in the film itself. But the way they embedded the non-diegetic and the diegetic sound with the soundtrack, that was awesome. It really connected the audience to the story and to the character.
Yeah. We are so going to the Himalayas.
about this film, I found really cool fun facts I want to share. And here's 3 of them. Fun fact number 1. Pearl Studios distributed Abominable in China by bypassing the nation's restrictions on foreign film imports with a Mandarin adaptation. Fun fact number 2. In this adaptation, they added well-known Chinese voice actors, modified the dialogue in order to adjust the humor according to Chinese culture. Now that was something I was expecting, because if you look at other films that have been released in, Spain or Latin America, they are all adapted with Spanish or Latin American voice actors. So they modify the dialogue in order for the audience in those regions to connect with the characters in this. Take Disney's Walt. So Walt was released in Spain, and they adjusted the music to, which takes us into fun fact number 3. Fun fact number 3. So they adjusted the music to a singer in Spain so that the audience can musically connect to the story. In Latin America, they did the same thing with a Latin American band, all for the same song, Barking at the Moon. Now back to Abominable. Now this is a segue into fun fact number 3, in which Coldplay's Fix You track is an essential part of the story, like I mentioned when we were talking about sound design. It didn't really connect with the Chinese audience, so what did they do? They did a Chinese adaptation of this song in order to connect with their Chinese audience. Now that was awesome, and that's it for the fun facts. Now I have a question for you guys. So do you think G's father was incarnated into this jetty in order to visit all these landmarks that he had promised G before his passing? Now think about it, because at the beginning of the film, the jetty is there, and he is looking at the postcards G has in this tent. He signals to them, and then signals to the billboard with a photo of the Himalayas. Remember, they are on a rooftop. But he signals to this billboard, visually communicating with G, and telling her, hey, I belong in the Himalayas. Will you help me get back to my family? So G consents to this and runs to her 2 cousins saying, hey, help me get this jetty back to his family in Mount Everest. So when they embark in this journey, they end up going to all these landmarks G's father had promised her and that she had hung up on this tent. Now, is that just coincidence? Or is Dreamworks telling the audience, hey, the jetty is G's father and has incarnated into this jetty so that he can fulfill his promise? So let me know what you think in the comments below. Alright, so that's it for me. I accept requests in the comments below. Love to know what you guys think on that last question. If you like what you see, click the like button and subscribe below, and I'll see you next time.